presentation will demonstrate you how to assemble a personal computer. This is internal view of your blank computer cabinet. There is variety of cabinets available in the market with different size and shapes. You can choose one according to your choice. This is power supply. It is also called SMPS. It means switch mode power supply. It sits at the top rear of the case. This is 5.2-inch base at the top for the CD-ROM drives. This is 3.5-inch base at the bottom where the floppy disk and hard drive will mount. You can attach more than one hard drive in the case to increase the storage capacity. This is where the motherboard will be mounted in the case. It includes small screws where motherboard will be attached. This is a close view of the screws that to be used to attach motherboard. The motherboard itself is supplied in an anti-static bag and should be kept there until you are ready to mount it in the case. Slide the motherboard gently into position so that the connectors at the rear mate with the holes in the back of the case. At the rear of the case, these are the holes for the motherboard connectors. These holes should match with the connectors of the motherboard. Once the motherboard is placed, insert screws into the mounting posts and tighten. These are the points where screws will be inserted. Each of the front panel leads and switches must be attached to the corresponding pins or connectors on the motherboard. The front panel connectors are A. Speaker, which often has a 3-pin wide connector, B. Power LED, C. ATX power switch, D. HDD LED, and E. Reset switch. Here is the another view after connecting all the connectors. Let's have a close look at the connectors. You can see here the close look of front panel switch or LED connectors. The processor is supplied in a sealed plastic case with the matching heatsink and fan combination. Before inserting the processor, raise the lever at the side of the socket. The processor will be inserted into a zero insertion force socket. Now the processor can be dropped into the socket. No force will be required to insert the processor. This is zero insertion force socket where the processor will be placed. Note that in the marked area, two holes are missing. At the bottom of the processor, two pins are also missing from the corner. After inserting the processor, move the lever back down until it is parallel to the board. The processor will be securely clipped into the place. This is heatsink and fan combination for the processor. The processor generates so much heat that it needs a heatsink and fan, and it must make good contact with the heatsink. Now, the heatsink and fan can be clipped over the processor. Heatsink and fan vary in their design and the construction. Your model may be slightly different. The heatsink and the processor should closely in contact with each other. They should be fit tightly so that the heat can be transferred from processor to the heatsink. Then you can clamp it down by flipping the levers at either side of the heatsink. Now, the fan power cable can be attached to the CPU fan power connector of the motherboard. Here is another view at the CPU fan power connector. This is power lead which is to be connected to the motherboard. SMPS has many power cables, but it can be distinguished easily due to its size. Now attach the power supply lead to the motherboard. This is close view of motherboard power supply connector. This is additional power lead for Pentium 4 and Celeron motherboard. Attach the additional power lead if required. Slots marked with red arrows are RAM slots. Most new motherboards today have 3 or 4 sockets for RAM. They are usually placed close to the processor. Push the RAM slots into the socket. As you push in them, the locks at each end will automatically rise and clamp the module into place. This is upper view of the RAM attached to the computer. Before inserting the hard drive, make sure it is configured correctly. This is hard disk drive, which is used to store the data. They vary in capacity and you can use it according to your choice. 40 GB and 80 GB hard disk drives are most common. Before inserting the hard drives, make sure it is configured correctly. Now gently slide the hard drive into a 3.5-inch bay. Insert at least 2 screws on each side of the drive that came with the case and then tighten them. The CD-ROM drive slides into one of the 5.25-inch bays. Make sure its jumper is set correctly. Now you can start attaching the data cables. The upper 2 slots are used to connect HDD and CD-ROM with motherboard via data cables. This small slot is used to connect the floppy drive to the motherboard. Now the other end of the primary IDE cable has been plugged into the hard drive. Once the data cables have been inserted, the power connectors can be attached. Attach these 4-pin power cables to HDD and CD-ROM. On the motherboard, these are PCI slots which are used to attach expansion card to the motherboard. For example, an internal modem. You can buy an internal modem from any computer hardware store. When inserting an expansion card, make sure that it mates with the socket precisely and correctly. Tighten the screw that holds the expansion card. It's time for final check the data and power cables connection. You can tidy up the cables so as to not impede airflow through the case. Attach the side panels and screw them into place. Now it's time to attach different peripherals. This shows the different slots of motherboard which is to be used for connect to the peripherals. Here mouse and keyboard will be connected. Here monitor will be connected. This is the cable from the monitor to connect with CPU. If you want to use network cable, then connect the cable here.